The sun rose lazily over the lush fields that sprawled across the countryside, casting a warm, golden hue over the quaint little town nestled amongst them. Each morning, as the village awoke, the familiar rhythm of life began to play out. In this small town where everyone knew each other by name, people valued routine and predictability. The local school was the heart of this community, where laughter and the pursuit of knowledge intertwined. I found solace in teaching. My classroom was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where young minds could explore and grow. It was a simple life, but it was one I cherished. I was a teacher, after all, and an exemplary one at that, if I might say so myself. On the outskirts of town, surrounded by acres of farmland, stood the farmhouse where I lived. It was a relic of another age, with its creaking porch and peeling paint. But it suited me fine. I had never felt the need for anything more extravagant. Instead, I dedicated myself to my students and the joy their learning brought me. The peace of my everyday life began to fray when I first noticed the shadows. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I saw them, creeping along the edges of my vision in places where they had no reason to be. I shook off the feeling, blaming it on fatigue. Teaching could be demanding, and I was no stranger to the exhaustion that came with it. Strange incidents began to occur with increasing frequency. At first, it was small things: misplaced keys, forgotten appointments, little disturbances that I could rationalize. But then, I started to feel watched. It was as if invisible eyes bore into me, tracking my every move. I told myself it was paranoia, a product of an overactive imagination. Despite these unsettling feelings, I continued to work. My students needed me, and the structure of the school day kept me grounded. I lost myself in lesson plans and grading, the monotony of it all a welcome refuge from the unsettling sense of being observed. Then came the peculiar messages. A note slipped into my desk drawer, scrawled in elegant, looping handwriting. "Do you see them too?" It read. I dismissed it as a prank, an elaborate joke from one of the students, perhaps. But the messages persisted. Each one was more cryptic, more taunting than the last. Yet no matter how hard I searched for their author, the source remained elusive. As the weeks went by, the feeling of being watched turned into something more sinister. I began to see figures in the distance, standing on the edge of the fields as I returned home from work. They were always just shapes, cloaked in shadow, and too far away for recognition. When I would blink, they would disappear, leaving me questioning my own sanity. Sleep became elusive as well. At night, I would lie awake listening to the farmhouse creak and groan, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I was haunted by the fear that something was coming for me, though I couldn't fathom what or why. The final straw came on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was grading papers when the power went out. It was sudden and absolute, plunging my home into silence. The isolation of the farmhouse that had once been comforting now felt like a trap. I lit a candle, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows against the walls. I heard footsteps then, soft, deliberate. They came from the hallway, echoing through the stillness. I knew I was alone in the house, yet the sound was unmistakable. Fear clenched my heart in an icy grip as I rose from my chair, the candle held aloft like a talisman. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling in the darkness. There was no response, only the steady, measured tread of footsteps drawing nearer. I backed away, my mind racing with scenarios of intruders and ghosts. Then there was a knock at the door. Not the front door, but the door leading down to the cellar. I had never been fond of the cellar. It was dank and musty, a place that held little interest for me. The knock was insistent, demanding attention. Against my better judgment, I moved toward it, the candlelight flickering as I went. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob. The door swung open with a creak, revealing only darkness beyond. The footsteps had stopped, leaving a pregnant silence in their wake. Taking a deep breath, I descended the stairs. The air grew colder as I went deeper, a chill that seeped into my bones. My candle illuminated shelves of dusty jars and forgotten relics, remnants of a bygone era. And there, in the far corner, I saw a figure hunched in the shadows. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice a mix of fear and authority. The figure shifted, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign. It was a reflection of my own, twisted with a malevolent smile. My heart stuttered in my chest as I staggered back, the candles slipping from my grasp and plunging us into darkness. When I awoke, I was alone once more, sprawled at the bottom of the cellar stairs. My head throbbed with pain, and for a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream. But the memory of that face lingered, a specter in my mind. In the days that followed, I tried to piece together what had happened. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense than before. And with it came a realization that chilled me to my core. The figure I had seen was not a stranger. It was a part of me, a side I had long suppressed. As a teacher, I had always prided myself on my control and composure. But now, I found myself unraveling. The shadows in my mind had taken form, threatening to consume me. I was no longer sure of what was real and what was imagined. I decided to seek help, to confide in someone who might understand. I reached out to a fellow teacher, a colleague I trusted. As I spoke of my fears and the strange occurrences, I watched her expression shift from concern to disbelief. By the time I finished, I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Maybe you just need some rest," she suggested gently. "Take a few days off, clear your head." I nodded, though I knew rest would not banish my demons. The feeling of unease clung to me, a second skin I could not shed. At home, I found myself unable to relax, the farmhouse no longer a refuge, but a prison. I became consumed with the idea that the figure in the cellar was a manifestation of something deeper, a darkness within me that I had never acknowledged. My thoughts spiraled into obsession as I combed through memories, searching for answers. The messages continued, now etched onto mirrors and windows, always in that same elegant script. "Do you see them too?" they asked, a taunt I could not escape. It was as if someone or something was drawing me into a game I did not understand. Then, abruptly, the messages stopped. The silence they left was more terrifying than their presence had been. I felt adrift, caught between reality and the nightmarish world of my own mind. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my study, a new thought took root. What if the figure in the cellar was not an apparition? What if it was someone else, entirely, someone with nefarious intent? The idea was absurd, but it clung to me with a strange sort of logic. I resolved to confront the cellar once more, to face whatever lay in the shadows. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I descended the stairs yet again. The cellar was as still and silent as before, but I felt a presence there, watching, waiting. As the beam of light swept across the room, it landed on something that made my blood run cold. On one of the shelves sat a small, unassuming box. It was marked with the same elegant handwriting as the messages I had found. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a collection of photographs, images of me going about my daily life, unaware of the lens trained upon me. My heart pounded in my chest as I sifted through them, the reality of my situation settling over me like a dark cloud. There was someone else. Someone who had been watching all along. Someone who had infiltrated my life and left me questioning my own sanity. The realization was both terrifying and oddly liberating. I was not alone in my madness. In the days that followed, I became consumed with the search for this other. I delved into the town's history, seeking out whispers of secrets and scandals long buried. It was a desperate quest, one that consumed my every waking moment, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The shadows receded. The feeling of being watched dissipated. I was left with a lingering unease, a sense that I had glimpsed the edge of something vast and unknowable. I returned to my teaching, though the experience had changed me. I was more vigilant, more attuned to the subtle shifts in my surroundings. The farmhouse, once a place of refuge, now felt like a testament to my own vulnerability. Life in the small town went on, the routines of daily life resuming their familiar patterns. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the world was not as it seemed. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In the stillness of night, when the shadows stretched long across the fields, I would think back to the cellar and the face that had haunted me. It was a part of me, I realized, a reflection of my own fears and desires. And though I had confronted it, I knew it would always be there, waiting in the depths of my mind. The perfect abduction plan, I had called it, once a way to capture my own fears and contain them. But now I understood that such things could never be truly contained. They were a part of the human experience, a reminder of the darkness that lay within us all. And so I continued on, carrying the weight of my experience with me. It was a burden and a gift, a reminder that the world was a far stranger place than I had ever imagined. And though the fear lingered, I found a strange comfort in it, knowing that I was not alone. The shadows would always be there, lurking on the edges of my vision. But I had learned to live with them, to find a balance between reality and the creeping dread that haunted my dreams. It was an uneasy peace, but it was mine. When I arrived at the university town, I was drawn by the charm of its winding streets and the historic grandeur of its architecture. The university itself stood like a venerable monument, its ivy-clad walls whispering secrets of the past to anyone who paused long enough to listen. The air was crisp with the onset of fall, and a sense of purpose hummed through the campus as students flitted between lectures and libraries. My life here promised to be one of intellectual rigor and discovery, and I felt at home among the stacks of books and the bustling halls. I settled into a routine, attending classes, meeting with study groups, and wandering the hallowed halls where the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. Evenings were spent in the common room of my dormitory, where laughter and the clinking of mugs blended into a soothing background symphony. As the confluence of the weather, I would sit at my desk, drawing Bachat, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary, yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, an unseen current began to stir. The first sign of disturbance came subtly, as such things often do. I was returning from the library one evening when a peculiar sensation washed over me, an inexplicable certainty that I was not alone. The street lamp cast an unwavering glow upon the cobblestone path, yet the shadows lingered unnaturally, stretching and curling like dark tendrils seeking purchase, and paused, glancing over my shoulder, but the street behind lay empty, save for the fluttering leaves. Dismissing it as the product of a weary mind, I continued on, eager to shake off the chill that had settled into my bones. But the feeling persisted. It clung to me like a second skin, growing more intense with each passing day. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more frequently, my senses attuned to the faintest of sounds, a rustling of leaves, a whisper of wind. One evening, as I sat in a quiet corner of the library, I felt a prickling at the nape of my neck. Slowly, I turned my head and met the gaze of a fellow student, a gaunt figure whose eyes were like dark pools, unfathomable and disconcerting. He stood by the shelves, expression unreadable, before slipping away into the labyrinth of books. I began to notice him everywhere, in the cafeteria line, across the lecture hall, leaning against a tree in the courtyard. He never approached, never spoke, yet his presence was a constant, unsettling reminder that something was amiss. I tried to ignore him, but his silent observations seeped into my thoughts, casting shadows over my once clear mind. As weeks turned into months, the tension mounted, and the line between reality and paranoia blurred. I confided in my roommate, Emily, hoping for reassurance, but her concern only deepened my unease. "It's probably nothing," she said, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. "Maybe he's just shy, or maybe he thinks you're interesting." Her words, meant to comfort, only fanned the flames of my anxiety. What if there was more to his interest than mere curiosity? What if I was the subject of some sinister intent? My sleep became fitful, haunted by dreams that dissolved into fragments upon waking. Shadowy figures, whispered warnings, a sense of impending doom. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the window panes and thunder rumbled in the distance, I awoke with a start. The dorm was silent, save for the patter of rain, yet a presence filled the room, oppressive and suffocating. I sat up, heart pounding, and found myself staring at the closed door. It was then that I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock. I hesitated, fear rooting me to the spot, but the knocking continued, insistent and unnerving. Summoning every ounce of courage, I rose and crossed the room, each step reverberating in the stillness. I opened the door a crack, peering into the dimly lit hallway. There was no one there, only the flickering light casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I closed the door, drawing the bolt with trembling fingers, and returned to bed, yet sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. The following day, exhaustion clung to me like a shroud. My thoughts were sluggish, my movements robotic as I navigated the familiar paths of campus life. In class, I struggled to focus, my mind drifting to the previous night's events. The knock, though seemingly innocuous, felt like a harbinger of something darker, a warning of what lay ahead. As the days wore on, the feeling of being watched intensified. It gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, making even the brightest day feel shrouded in shadow. I began to avoid the library, the cafeteria, any place where the silent watcher might lurk. My social life withered as I withdrew into myself, the fear of the unknown isolating me from friends and classmates. Then came the day when everything changed. I was walking across the quad, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass, when I saw him again, the gaunt figure, standing by the fountain. Our eyes met, and for the first time, he moved toward me, his steps deliberate and measured. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears as I stood frozen, rooted to the spot. As he approached, I noticed something I had not seen before, a small leather-bound book clutched in his hands. He stopped a few paces from me, his gaze steady and unblinking. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low and tinged with urgency. "They're coming for you?" The words sent a jolt through me, a bolt of fear and confusion that left me reeling. "Who?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. But he shook his head, handing me the book before turning and walking away, disappearing into the throng of students. I stood there, the book heavy in my hands, its leather cool against my skin. It was unmarked, devoid of any title or indication of its contents. I opened it, flipping through the pages to find them filled with meticulous handwriting, diagrams and symbols I didn't recognize. It was a journal, a record of observations and warnings, the words swirling like a vortex, pulling me in. Later that night, I pored over the book in my room, trying to decipher its contents. The entries were fragmented, disjointed, yet a pattern began to emerge, a tapestry of events and omens that painted a picture of an unseen presence, a malevolent force stalking the campus. The warnings were clear. Something ancient and otherworldly was awakening, its hunger insatiable, its reach inexorable. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over my senses and dragging me into its depths. The presence I had felt, the eyes watching me from the shadows. It was all connected, part of a larger, darker design. And I was at the center, a pawn in a game I neither understood nor consented to play. The days that followed were a blur of fear and uncertainty. I avoided the places that had once been my refuge. The library, the quad, the common rooms where laughter had once echoed. The campus, with its grand facades and bustling energy, now felt like a labyrinth of dangers, each corner hiding untold threats. The journal became my lifeline, its pages a window into the unseen world that lurked beneath the surface of reality. Emily noticed my withdrawal and tried to coax me back into the fold of normalcy. But her words were like distant echoes, unable to pierce the fog of dread that enveloped me. I wanted to tell her everything, to share the burden of knowledge that weighed heavily on my mind, yet I feared drawing her into the darkness that threatened to consume me. One evening, unable to bear the isolation any longer, I ventured out to the courtyard, the journal clutched tightly under my arm. The night was clear, the stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, yet the air was thick with tension, an electric charge crackling just below the surface. I found a secluded bench and settled down, flipping open the book to a page marked with a hastily scrawled note. "The time is near." As I read, the shadows around me seemed to deepen, the darkness pressing closer with each passing moment. A chill swept over me and I realized, with a sinking heart, that I was not alone. The presence I had come to dread was here, palpable and oppressive. And there was nowhere to run. In that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, her form insubstantial, shimmering like a mirage. Her eyes, dark and knowing, locked onto mine, and I felt the weight of her gaze settle over me. "You have seen too much," she whispered, her voice a soft caress that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to speak, to question, to plead, but the words stuck in my throat, choked by fear. The woman reached out, her fingers brushing against my forehead, and a cascade of images flooded my mind, a torrent of memories, of places and faces that were not my own. I saw the university as it once was, a bastion of light and knowledge, and the darkness that had crept in, insidious and relentless. The vision faded, leaving me breathless and disoriented. The woman stood before me, her expression inscrutable, and I understood, with a dreadful clarity, that I was a part of this story, bound by fate to the events that were unfolding. "Beware the shadows," she warned, her voice echoing in the stillness. They seek the light within you. With that, she was gone, vanishing into the night like a wisp of smoke. I sat there, the journal open in my lap, the pages rustling softly in the breeze. The warning had been delivered, the choice laid before me, to flee or to stand, to confront the darkness or be consumed by it. As dawn broke, I returned to my room, the echoes of the night's encounter lingering like a whisper in the back of my mind. The gaunt figure, the journal, the apparition, all were pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to comprehend. Yet one thing was clear. I could no longer ignore the shadows that crept along the edges of my world, nor the role I was destined to play. The days slipped by, each one bringing with it a renewed sense of purpose, tempered by the ever-present fear that coiled in my gut. I moved through the campus like a ghost, watching and waiting, the journal my constant companion. The warnings were there, etched into its pages, a guide to navigating the treacherous path I found myself on. And though the fear remained, a part of me began to understand, perhaps. This was the nature of light and darkness, a dance as old as time itself. The knowledge brought a measure of peace, a sliver of hope that whispered of survival and strength. I knew the shadows were still out there, watching, waiting, but so was I, no longer a passive observer, but an active participant in this strange, haunting tale. The university, once a place of learning and growth, had become a battleground, and I was determined to see it through, to uncover the truth that lay hidden in the darkness. As the leaves turned and the seasons shifted, the tension that had once gripped my heart began to ease. The warnings had been heard, the harbingers acknowledged, and though the threat lingered, its power over me had waned. I would remain vigilant, wary of the unseen forces that prowled the night, but I refused to let them dictate my life, my choices. In the end, the fear that had once consumed me became a companion, a reminder of the fragility of the world we inhabit, and the strength we must find within ourselves to face the unknown. The shadows might never retreat entirely, but as long as there was light, there was hope, and that was enough. The day began like any other, a seamless transition from the soft darkness of sleep to the muted light filtering through the worn-out curtains of my modest apartment. I often found solace in these quiet mornings, where the world seemed to hold its breath, granting me a momentary reprieve from the chaos that life could sometimes become. My apartment was a small, comfortable refuge from the bustling city outside, its walls filled with memories and the familiar hum of technology steadily working in the background. The apartment was modest but reassuringly familiar. Walls clad in muted tones, adorned with photographs of family gatherings and adventures from years past. The living room was my favorite place, where my trusty laptop perched on the desk, a window to the broader world beyond. My mornings were a routine. Wake up, brew coffee, and settle down to scroll through the news and catch up on emails. It was a ritual I found grounding, a tether to normalcy in an ever-changing world. It wasn't until the first cup of coffee had been savored that I noticed something peculiar. My laptop, usually a portal of productivity and entertainment, had begun behaving strangely. On opening it, instead of the usual array of tabs and documents, a blank screen stared back at me, save for a single blinking cursor. I frowned, suspecting a malfunction, and attempted a reboot. But as the device restarted, the screen remained stubbornly vacant, save for that incessant, taunting cursor. Before I could ponder the cause, the cursor began to move, seemingly of its own volition. Words appeared slowly, deliberately. "Ravi, can you see this?" I blinked, taken aback. My name on the screen was unsettling, like a whisper in an empty room. I glanced around, half expecting some hidden prankster to leap out, laughing at my bewilderment. But the room remained silent, and the apartment was as empty as it had been moments before. The rational part of my mind insisted there must be a logical explanation. A virus, perhaps? Or a hack? Yet, something about this seemed too personal, too deliberate. I hesitated before typing my response, fingers trembling slightly. Yes? Who is this? I wrote, my eyes flicking back and forth between the screen and the door, half expecting the mystery to resolve itself with a knock or a ringing phone. The reply was immediate, as if the unknown correspondent had been eagerly awaiting my response. I'm a friend, the screen displayed. I need your help. The words seemed innocent enough, but their appearance on my personal device without any clear source was anything but. My heart thudded in my chest, a drumbeat of anxiety that echoed in the silence of the room. Despite my instinct to shut down the laptop and flee the uncanny interaction, curiosity held me captive. What do you need? I typed, feeling an irrational pull towards the conversation. The world felt suddenly smaller, more confined, as if the walls of my apartment were closing in, trapping me in this digital dialogue. The screen flickered as new words appeared, each one wrapping around my mind like a tendril of smoke. There are things hidden in the places you least expect. You must find them before it's too late. The cryptic message sent a shiver down my spine, the temperature in the room seeming to drop, as if the very air had become charged with an unspoken threat. My rational mind screamed at me to stop, to disconnect and seek help, but instead, I found myself typing, "What things? Where do I look?" Each keystroke felt like a commitment, a step further down a path I couldn't quite see. There was a pause, a moment of suspense that stretched until it felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. The reply was both clear and frustratingly vague. Look where the past meets the future. Follow the light. The words left me with more questions than answers, and an inexplicable sense of urgency settled over me. The apartment seemed suddenly foreign, every shadow potentially hiding the secrets I was now tasked with uncovering. As the day wore on, the message gnawed at my thoughts, casting a shadow over even the most mundane of tasks. I found myself examining every corner of the apartment, searching for something, anything that might fit the riddle. Each time I turned on a light or opened a window, I half expected to find a hidden clue waiting for me. The living room, with its assortment of knickknacks and memories, seemed like the most logical place to begin. I moved through it with a purposeful determination, examining every object with a scrutinizing eye. My gaze fell upon the family photos that lined the walls, snapshots of laughter and love preserved in time. Where the past meets the future, I mused, could it be something here? My attention was drawn to a particular photograph, one I had nearly forgotten. It was of my parents, taken on their wedding day. Their faces shone with happiness and hope, a promise of the future they were about to build together. Beneath the photograph, tucked into the frame, was an envelope I'd never noticed before. My heart quickened as I retrieved it. The paper yellowed with age. Inside was a simple note, written in my father's familiar scrawl. "For my dearest Ravi, may you always find light in the darkest of places." The words were bittersweet, a reminder of the man who had been my guide and protector. Yet, they also seemed to echo the strange message on my laptop. Light in darkness. Could this be it? I turned the note over, half expecting further instruction, but it was blank. Frustration simmered beneath the surface of my mind, the mysteries layering upon themselves like a puzzle without a solution. As the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I felt the urgency intensify. What light was I meant to follow? It was then that I remembered the old flashlight, a relic from my childhood adventures. I retrieved it from a drawer, its weight familiar in my hand. As I switched it on, the beam cut through the gathering gloom, illuminating the room with a stark white light. I swept it across the walls, feeling a strange compulsion to trace the path of illumination. The beam passed over the bookshelf, a collection of stories that had accompanied me through life. And there, amidst the rows of spines and dust, something peculiar caught my eye. A book, seemingly out of place with no title on its spine. My breath caught as I pulled it free, the weight heavier than I expected. Inside, instead of text, the pages held a series of photographs, each one depicting an unfamiliar place. They were grainy and dark, snapshots of abandoned buildings and desolate streets. But one stood out, a picture of my own apartment, taken from the inside. The perspective was unsettling, as if the photographer had been standing where I now stood, looking through the very lens I now held. A chill crept down my spine, the realization curling around my mind like a shadow. Someone had been here, in my home, documenting my life without my knowledge. The thought was both terrifying and infuriating, a violation of the sanctuary I had crafted. I returned to the laptop, my fingers flying over the keyboard in a frenzy of fear and anger. Who are you? Why are you doing this? The words felt inadequate, a desperate attempt to confront the unknown entity that had invaded my world. The response was immediate, as if the other party had been waiting for this moment of confrontation. I am the keeper of secrets, Ravi. I watch over those who seek the truth hidden in plain sight. The words were cryptic, as usual, yet they carried a weight that settled deep in my bones. A keeper of secrets. But what secrets? And why me? The atmosphere in the apartment felt charged, as if the very walls were listening, waiting for the next move in this unsettling game. The photograph book lay open on the table, each image a testament to the unseen presence that had infiltrated my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every action was being scrutinized by unseen eyes. As the evening darkened into night, the shadows lengthened, filling the room with an oppressive weight. I found myself jumping at every creak and groan of the old building, each sound a reminder of my vulnerability. The apartment, once a haven, now felt like a cage, trapping me in this dance of uncertainty. Sleep was elusive, my mind replaying the day's events in an endless loop. The cryptic messages, the hidden notes, the photographs, they all spun together in a web of fear and intrigue. I lay awake, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock, each minute a reminder of the time slipping away. It was in the deepest hours of the night, when the world was hushed and still, that the laptop came to life once more. The screen glowed in the darkness, casting an eerie light across the room. I watched, mesmerized and fearful, as new words appeared, each one a whisper of impending revelation. Time is running out, Ravi. You must choose to see or remain in the shadows. There was an urgency to the message, a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. The choice felt monumental, as if the future hinged on my decision. But what choice did I have, really? To seek out the truth, or to hide from it, hoping the shadows would swallow it whole? With trembling hands, I typed my response. I choose to see. Show me. The commitment felt like a release, a relinquishing of control to whatever forces had drawn me into this enigma. The laptop screen flickered, and for a moment I feared it would go blank again, leaving me alone in the darkness. Instead, images began to play, a montage of familiar and unfamiliar sights, faces I knew and places I'd never seen. And then, the final frame, a live feed, grainy yet unmistakable, of myself, sitting at the desk. The realization was a jolt, a visceral punch that left me breathless. The camera was here somewhere, capturing my every move. Panic surged through me. A rising tide that threatened to drown out all logic leapt from the chair, scanning the room for the hidden device, the unseen eye that had been watching me. But every corner was empty, the apartment offering no clues to the voyeur's whereabouts. The screen flashed once more, a final message that sealed the night's revelations. The truth is always hidden in the open, Ravi. You are never truly alone. The words lingered, a haunting reminder of the unseen presence that now felt inescapable. As dawn broke, spilling light across the city, I sat in silent reflection. The events of the night had shifted something within me, a fundamental understanding of the world and my place within it. The fear remained, a living thing that curled at the edges of my consciousness, whispering reminders of the secrets that lay just beyond sight. The apartment, for all its familiarity, felt forever changed. Each crevice a potential hiding place for the mysteries that had been revealed. I knew I would never look at it the same way again. Nor could I return to the blissful ignorance that had been my shield. In the days that followed, I moved through life with a heightened awareness, each moment tinged with the knowledge of unseen eyes and whispered warnings. The choice to see had been made, and I could not turn back. The secrets of the world, the truths hidden in plain sight, were now my companions. For better or worse, the fear lingered, a constant shadow at my side, but it was tempered by a new understanding, that the darkness held not only terror, but also the potential for light, a light that I could choose to seek. Even when the path was shrouded in uncertainty, there is a strange kind of peace that envelops an apartment complex late at night. The hum of distant traffic fades into a backdrop of silence, punctuated only by the occasional footstep or the soft sound of a television murmuring through walls. Being on the 6th floor, where the wind tends to linger longer on the balcony, I often found myself drawn to the quiet solace it provided. It was my sanctuary after a long day, a place where I could let my thoughts drift away like the autumn leaves that would catch the wind and soar above the city below. My life was governed by a comforting routine. Each day was a tapestry woven with predictable patterns: work, a jog at the park, dinner with a book in hand, and finally, a moment to breathe on the balcony, the city sprawling beneath me like a slumbering beast. I was content in my solitude, my interactions with neighbors minimal and polite. The few faces I recognized would nod or smile in passing, and we would exchange pleasantries without ever truly engaging in conversation. It was an existence painted in muted colors, soothing in its lack of drama or disruption. It was during one of my nightly rituals that things began to shift. I had taken out the trash, a mundane chore that I performed with the same mechanical precision each week. The hallway outside my door was dimly lit, echoing with the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. As I turned the corner toward the trash chute, I saw her, my neighbor from across the hall, standing by the chute, her back to me. Christine was her name, a woman of few words and fewer smiles. Our exchanges had been brief and formal, nods when we crossed paths, a mumbled greeting in the elevator. But there was something about her that night that made me pause. She stood motionless, her hand hovering over the handle of the chute, as if contemplating the act of letting go of whatever she held. I hesitated, caught in the tension of the moment, unsure whether to speak or quietly slip away. "Everything all right, Christine?" I ventured, my voice sounding unusually loud against the quiet of the corridor. She turned slowly, almost deliberately, and when her eyes met mine, I felt a chill brush over my skin. Her gaze was vacant, as if she were staring through me rather than at me. It was unsettling, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, dreamlike. "It's time to take out the trash," she said, her words hanging in the air like a question rather than a statement. I nodded, unsure how to respond, and watched as she turned back to the chute, her movements deliberate, mechanical. I left her there, the sound of the chute door closing echoing behind me as I returned to my apartment. The encounter lingered in my mind, a ripple in the calm waters of my routine, but I dismissed it as fatigue, or perhaps the odd nature of the hour. The following days slipped back into their familiar rhythm, the memory of that strange encounter fading into the background. It wasn't until a week later, as I was once again taking out the trash, that the air around me seemed to shift, a subtle change that I couldn't quite place. As I approached the chute, I saw Christine again, standing in the same position, her back turned, her hand poised over the handle. This time I hesitated longer, studying her as she stood there. The hallway felt colder, the light more oppressive. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, the sound of my footsteps announcing my presence. "Christine!" I called out, my voice softer, aware now of the fragility of the moment. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine with the same unsettling vacancy. "It's time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was a gravity in her words that sent a shiver through me, a sense of something unspoken lingering just out of reach. The unease clung to me like a shadow, following me back to my apartment. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing more than a coincidence, yet a part of me knew better, that instinctual part that sensed a disturbance in the familiar pattern of my life. Days blurred together, and I kept to my routine, but now with a heightened awareness. I watched Christine when I could, out of a curiosity tinged with apprehension. She moved through the world as if guided by an unseen force, her expressions distant, her interactions clipped and formal. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like a melody played just slightly off-key. It was a week later when the pattern broke entirely. I was returning home late, the corridors of the apartment complex bathed in a muted half-light. As I walked towards my door, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from the direction of Christine's apartment. Curiosity mingled with dread as I approached, the sound growing louder, more insistent. Her door was ajar, a sliver of shadow visible through the opening. I hesitated, conflicted between the urge to walk away and the need to understand what was happening. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and peered through the gap. Christine stood in the middle of her living room, facing away from me. She was tapping her fingers against her thigh, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to echo in the silent room. Her movements were fluid, almost rehearsed, and there was an unnerving calm about her. "Christine?" I called softly, stepping back as she turned to face me. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, and for a moment I was certain she didn't recognize me. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low, a hint of something warning in her tone. "I'm sorry," I stammered, taking a step back. "I heard. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." She tilted her head, considering me with an unnerving intensity. "It's not safe," she whispered, her words carrying a weight that pressed against the air between us. "It's never safe." I backed away slowly, her gaze following me until I was out of sight. My heart raced as I locked my door behind me, the familiar walls of my apartment offering no comfort against the rising tide of unease that had taken hold of me. I found myself pacing, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The rational part of my mind struggled to dismiss it as the eccentric behavior of a reclusive neighbor, but the instinctual part whispered of something darker, something that defied explanation. The atmosphere in the apartment complex shifted in the days that followed. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to Christine's door, as if expecting it to swing open and reveal some hidden truth. There was a collective unease, a shared tension that crackled in the air like static. Each night, as I stood on my balcony, I felt the weight of something unnamed pressing down on me. A sense of being watched that left me restless, unable to shake the feeling of impending dread. It was during one of these nights, as the city lay quietly under a blanket of stars, that I noticed something strange. A figure stood on the balcony across from mine, silhouetted against the dim glow of the apartment behind it. I squinted, trying to make out the details, but the distance and the shadows conspired to keep them hidden. The figure stood motionless, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized it was mimicking my stance, its head tilted in the same angle, its posture a mirror of my own. I took a step back, my heart pounding, and watched as it did the same. Fear tightened around me like a vice, and I stumbled back inside, closing the balcony door with trembling hands. What was happening? My thoughts were a tangled web of confusion and fear, spinning out of control as I tried to make sense of the impossible. Sleep was elusive that night, my mind replaying the image of the figure, its unsettling mimicry haunting me like a specter. I awoke in the early hours, my room bathed in the pale light of dawn, a sense of urgency thrumming through me. Driven by a need for answers, I crossed the hall and knocked on Christine's door, the sound echoing in the quiet corridor. There was no response, and after a hesitant pause, I tried the handle, surprised when it turned easily in my hand. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the morning light. I stepped inside, the air thick with a sense of abandonment, as if the space had been vacated in haste. I called out for Christine, my voice breaking the silence, but there was no reply. I moved through the rooms, searching for any sign of her, my heart heavy with a sense of inevitability. It was in the bedroom that I found the note. A single sheet of paper folded neatly on the pillow. My hand shook as I picked it up, unfolding it with delicate care. The words were scrawled hastily, the handwriting a frantic dance across the page. "It's time to take out the trash. Don't look back." I stared at the note, the implication settling over me like a shroud. What did it mean? Where had she gone? And why did it feel as though the message was meant for me? As if I were now part of whatever strange game had ensnared her. The questions followed me as I left the apartment, the note clutched tightly in my hand, a talisman against the unknown. I spent the day in a haze, the world around me disconnected and distant. Every shadow in the corner of my vision a reminder of the figure on the balcony. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, I returned to the balcony, driven by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The air was still, heavy with anticipation, and as I stepped out, I found myself staring across the void to the opposite balcony. The figure was there again, waiting, its presence a dark blot against the dying light. The fear that had gripped me before was replaced by a strange sense of calm, a resignation to the inevitable. I studied the figure, noting the familiar lines of its form, the way it seemed to breathe in time with me, a shadow of my own making. Then, without warning, it stepped forward into the light, and I gasped. It was Christine, or a version of her, her features distorted and twisted, a grotesque parody of the woman I had known. Her eyes met mine, and in that gaze I saw my reflection, a distorted mirror of my own fears and uncertainties. And then it smiled, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver through me. It raised a hand, mimicking the act of taking out the trash, and in that moment I understood. There was no separation between us, no division between the roles we played and the facades we wore. I stumbled back, my mind reeling with the revelation, and as I did, the figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, leaving me alone under the vast, uncaring sky. The world felt different now. The edges of my reality blurred and uncertain, as if the line between what was real and what was imagined had been irrevocably crossed. As days turned into weeks, the events of that night faded into a lingering fear, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. Christine's apartment remained empty, the door closed, a silent testament to the mystery that had played out within its walls. The neighbors resumed their routines, their lives a continuation of the patterns they had always followed. But I found no comfort in the familiar. Each night, as I stood on the balcony, I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, a sense of being watched that refused to relent. The city stretched out below, vast and indifferent, a reminder of my insignificance in the grand scheme of things. The stars blinked down from the heavens, cold and distant, and I wondered if somewhere in the darkness, Christine watched too, a part of the shadow that had seeped into my world. And though the rational part of me insisted that it was over, that whatever force had gripped us had moved on, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to return. There was a lesson in it all, a warning in the quiet terror that had seeped into the fabric of my life. But the meaning eluded me, slipping through my fingers like sand. The shadows on the balcony remained, a constant reminder of the unknown. And as I looked out over the city, I understood that some mysteries were not meant to be solved. Some questions best left unanswered. For in the depths of night, when the world was silent and still, the fear that lingered was not of the dark, but of the reflection staring back from within. Life in the city was a tightly choreographed dance of predictability and convenience, an intricate web of interactions that rarely deviated from its routine. My days began with the soft chime of my phone alarm, pulling me from the depths of sleep into the dim light of my small apartment. The space was cluttered yet comfortable, filled with the artifacts of a life in transition. Books stacked on the coffee table, clothes draped over the chairs, and the persistent hum of the city filtering through the thin walls. It was a sanctuary in the chaos, an island of solitude amidst the cacophony of urban life. After pulling on a set of clothes that felt increasingly like a uniform, a plain shirt, jeans, and a well-worn jacket, I would step out into the corridor, greeted by the familiar sounds of doors closing and footsteps echoing like a distant drumbeat. The elevator ride down was often shared with neighbors, each of us lost in our own thoughts, nodding politely, our interaction scripted and unchanging. The street outside was a river of movement, a stream of people weaving their paths to work, school, or errands. It was easy to become part of this flow, allowing myself to be carried along, stopping briefly at the corner cafe, where the barista greeted me by name, her smile a constant, even as the world spun around us. Work was uneventful, the hours blending together in a haze of data and emails, punctuated only by the occasional meeting or coffee break. It was a routine that offered comfort in its predictability, the kind of existence that demanded little more than my presence. My evenings were mine to mold, usually spent reading or watching television, the cityscape outside my window a silent witness to my solitude. But then, like the slow encroachment of a shadow, things began to change. It started with a sense of being watched, an unsettling awareness that crept into the edges of my vision and settled like a weight on my shoulders. It was a feeling that clung to me as I walked through the streets, my eyes flicking to faces in the crowd, searching for something out of place. I told myself it was nothing, a figment of an overactive imagination, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. It was during one of my routine visits to the McDonald's bathroom, a nondescript utilitarian space that offered a brief respite from the bustle outside, that I saw it for the first time. Scrawled on the wall above the sink, in faint letters that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, were the words, "I am always watching." I stared at the message, my heart a sudden frantic drum in my chest. The letters were small, almost an afterthought against the tiles, but their impact was immediate and visceral. I felt exposed, as if the walls themselves had eyes tracking my every move. I left the bathroom quickly, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and unease. From that point on, the signs were everywhere, a shadow lingering too long at the end of my street, a figure in a hoodie watching from across the cafe, the constant flicker of a camera phone in my peripheral vision. It was a game of cat and mouse, the rules unknown, the stakes growing higher as my sense of normalcy crumbled. I tried to confide in friends, seeking solace in their assurances that it was all in my head, but the doubt lingered, a ghostly specter that refused to be banished. The city, once a tapestry of familiarity, had become a labyrinth of hidden eyes and whispered threats. Every sound, every movement, seemed charged with sinister intent. The escalation was subtle, yet relentless, like a tide inching its way up the shore. The messages appeared more frequently, in places that felt impossibly personal. A note slipped under my apartment door, a text from an unknown number reading simply, "I'm closer than you think." It was a campaign of psychological warfare, gnawing at the edges of my sanity, leaving me raw and exposed. I doubled my efforts to find the source, retracing my steps, scanning faces in the crowd, looking for anything that might betray the presence of my unseen observer. But if they were there, they remained hidden, a phantom moving through the city's shadows. The climax came one night as I was returning home, the streets awash in the golden glow of streetlights, the sky a tapestry of stars obscured by the city's haze. I felt it then, a presence behind me, mirroring my steps, a shadow in perfect synchrony. My heart races as I quicken my pace, the sound of footsteps echoing in the space between buildings. I turned sharply at a corner, ducking into the entryway of a cafe, its neon sign casting a sickly light over the pavement. My breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline coursing through my veins like fire. I waited, counting the seconds, listening for the sound that would confirm my fears. The figure appeared, pausing at the corner, their silhouette a dark cutout against the lamplight. They lingered, as if savoring the moment before stepping back into the shadows. leaving me alone with my racing heart and spiraling thoughts. In the days that followed, the sense of dread became a constant companion, a dark cloud that hovered over my every move. I felt trapped, cornered in a game with no exit, the roles of predator and prey shifting in a dance I could not escape. The lingering fear was a weight that settled into my bones, a chill that refused to dissipate. My apartment, once a haven, had become a prison, its walls closing in, the air thick with the echo of unseen laughter. Even the city itself seemed to conspire against me, its streets twisting into a maze of paranoia and despair. In the end, it was not the fear of being watched that haunted me, but the fear of never finding answers, of living in a state of perpetual uncertainty, always one step behind a shadow that could never be caught. It was a story without a conclusion, a nightmare from which I could not wake. The world around me shifting in a kaleidoscope of fear and doubt. I moved through the days in a haze, each moment a struggle to maintain a facade of normalcy, to convince myself that the world was not as dark as it seemed. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the city's noise faded to a whisper, I could feel the eyes on me still, watching, waiting, always there, a constant reminder that the dance was far from over.